All right. So before, sorry, get my heat right here. I didn't record this part. I had already cut up my potatoes, and I had cooked those separately. I started with cold water, salted them, and brought those to a boil. Your recipe says to cook the potatoes in the soup itself. To avoid scorching the milk, I cook them separately. Just make sure that you salt them so that way they have some flavor in there. And then they are already ready to go. So as soon as my soup has started and I'm ready to add those potatoes in, they're already cooked, so I could just slide those right in. Okay, so I had already done that part. My potatoes are cooling down right now. And we're just going to small dice here our onions and our celery. Okay. Set that right there. I cut up my celery. This recipe is pretty straightforward. I would say without the exception of those potatoes, I do recommend that those do get cooked separately. Just be careful because we are cooking with milk. Remember to watch that heat. All right, we don't want to scorch the milk. If you actually end up scorching the bottom of your pot while your soup is cooking, don't try to scrape up that bottom. All right, we don't want to end up with those burnt milk pieces in our stew. So just leave it, transfer your soup into another pot, and just continue working. Make sure you drop your temperature if you need to. All right, but as long as you're watching it and your temperature isn't too high, you shouldn't have any issues. All right, these are ready. My pan is nice and hot. Your recipe does say to use 3 celery. I think I used 1.5 here. I think that's plenty. It just depends on the size of the celery that you do have. So if you had some rather small pieces, feel free to use all 3. If you had some bigger pieces, like I had there, I would just use 1.5 or even just 2. All right, now I'm going to move on to our raw ingredients here, which is our bacon. All right, I had partially frozen my bacon. I do find that that makes it a little bit easier to cut up. All right, especially I want to end up with some rather small pieces rather than some large lardons. I don't want to see any big chunks of bacon throughout my chowder. Everything is cut up rather small, so you don't want to have small pieces of clam, small pieces of potato, and these large pieces of bacon. So by partially freezing that bacon, I mean, bacon freezes pretty quickly. I just put it in that freezer 30 minutes prior to you starting. Get it nice and cold. It does make it a little bit easier to cut through. All right. All right. So my pan is nice and hot. Again, making sure you're starting with that hot pan will ensure that your bacon doesn't stick. If your pan's too cold, that bacon is going to stick to it, causing some trouble then. You see it's nice and hot, moves very easily. All right, so we're just rendering out that bacon. We're going to develop some color. We're going to go about a partial cook on this bacon, and then we're going to add the mirepoix to it. All right, and then we'll continue, that bacon will continue to cook, and then we'll also get that saute on the mirepoix. So we're going to go about halfway here. All So I don't know if you guys can see that. It is about halfway. It is starting to develop a little bit of color. We don't want it to get completely brown quite yet. So we're going to add the onion and celery to the bacon. We're going to add our seasoning, some salt, and some pepper. We're going to let this continue to brown our bacon and also soften our veggies here. You know, I was saying that it is a lot, so you can see that even just that 1.5 celery and half of an onion, it filled up that pan quite a bit. Make sure that you do a small dice. Like I said, we don't want any large pieces. Celery does take quite a bit to break down and soften. So if you did have large chunks of celery, by the time everything is all ready, you're going to have those chunks of crunchy celery, and you really don't want that in your clam chowder. All right. I'm going to go check on my potatoes. I think they should be cool on this now. Yeah, they are. So I don't know if you can see that. They're rather small dice as well to go right into that soup to blend in. Again, I started those with cold salted water, brought it to a boil, just cook them until they're al dente. strained it out. I laid it on this plate here, and then I put it in my freezer. It's probably been in there for about 10 minutes. That's just to kind of blast chill it, let it cool down, and now they're ready to be added in when it's time. I don't know if you can see that very well. The bacon is developing a little bit more color there. The onions are becoming translucent. We'll let it go a couple more seconds here. It's just about ready though to continue on. I'm going to turn my heat down a little bit. So I don't know if you can tell. It's got some color in there. All right. So now,
Chef,
yes.
my son wants to tell you hi.
Okay.
You
Hey, how are
Yeah.
you?
good?
All
Right. Thank you.
No problem. All right, so we're adding in some butter. I have some clarified butter here. You can use whole butter, it'll be just fine. All right. So add that clarified butter in. We're now going to add in our flour. We are creating our roux right here with all of our mirepoix and our bacon. All right, and you can see that that flour just absorbed all of that fat that was in there, that bacon fat and that butter. All right. Now I'm going to start to incorporate my milk. Remember to continue to add a little bit at a time so we can break up our roux. If you add too much at once, then you could end up with chunks of that roux throughout your soup. You don't want that. And I think you're going to need more milk than what your recipe is calling for here. I can almost guarantee it. What you could do is if you don't have any milk, you can create a clam stock using the clam base that you guys have. Just add some water to that base and stir it out. And then you can add that into your soup here. If you have milk on hand, other than what was given to you, just go ahead and use that. Because I've just about incorporated all of the milk that was in that little carton there. And as you can tell, it does not look like soup. It still needs a whole lot more to be that soup consistency. All right, so I'm gonna grab the other milk that I have in my fridge. You can see it's not soup, right? It definitely needs some more milk. All right. Keep incorporating that in there. So remember that when we're working with flour, we're going to want to let it cook out. So plan for this. Once you get it to that soup consistency, plan for it to let it cook out for about 20 to 30 minutes. All of that flour that's in there. All right. And remember that when you are working with a roux, that roux is going to continue to thicken. So even as it's sitting and it's cooking for 20, 30 minutes, you may need to go back to it and continue to add liquid to it. All right, and you can see there, you can see the chunks of the veggies and of the bacon, but there's no chunks of roux. All right. If you did end up with chunks of roux, it'd be pretty hard to get them out at this point. If we were to try and strain this, we would be losing all of our veggies here, all of our bacon. So please take your time and when you're incorporating all of that milk into it. All right, so it's nice and thin. I'm gonna go ahead and add some of my cream to it. All right, and I'm gonna add this clam base in there. All right, once you get that incorporated, we're gonna turn down our heat. We want it on about a low heat. We're gonna continue to stir it and keep an eye on it, and we're gonna time it for about 20 minutes, and then we'll be able to taste it. And you shouldn't be able to taste any of that flour. If you do, let it cook a little bit longer. And then once you're ready, then you're ready to continue on with the next steps. Okay.
Chef, I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm doing the sauce right now, but it's too liquidy.
Hold on. All right. So it's been cooking. I tasted it. Does not taste like flour. So I'm going to open up my can of clams here and add that in. Just stir that in to combine. And I'm gonna let those flavors kind of melt together for a couple minutes before I add my potatoes in. My potatoes are already cooked, so I don't want to, once I add those in, I don't really want to continue cooking my chowder anymore because I don't want my potatoes to turn into mashed potatoes, okay? So I'm just going to give it another taste, and I'm going to adjust my seasonings. Yeah, it really doesn't even need that much salt. That bacon's so salty that it's really okay. I mean, I only added salt in the beginning when I was sauteing that mirepoix. It really doesn't need that much, and I don't say that very often or lightly. All right, so we're just gonna let that. Remember when you're using kosher salt to let it dissolve a little bit. I added in that thyme too, that fresh thyme. You don't want to add that fresh thyme in at the beginning because that nice bright green color is going to turn black the longer it cooks. So I always add my fresh herbs towards the end of the cooking process, no matter what it is that I'm making. I want it to retain its color. And you can see it's starting to come up there. All right, we'll go ahead and add these potatoes in. And then I'm just gonna let the potatoes kind of sit in there for a couple minutes. They were cooled down, so I'm gonna let them come back up to temperature, and that's it, we're done. I'll give it one more taste as well. Oh, you see that? That's a good consistency. You don't really want it thicker than that. But those potatoes are gonna release some of their starch too, so it will thicken. Yeah, it really didn't need that much salt. It had saltiness from that bacon. That clam base had some saltiness to it, and then of course those clams themselves. So I really did not add that much here. All right, there we are. There is our clam chowder. We're done. All right, and you can see nice, good consistency, not too thin, but not too thick either. Okay.